Dear listeners, today, on the occasion of Christmas, we are taking a break from our usual programming to present a discussion that captures the diverse ways in which this festival is celebrated in the country. This episode is from the Sandeep Roy Show and was originally published last year. The discussion features writers Jerry Pinto and Madhulika Liddle, who are speaking to Sandeep about what makes Christmas unique in India. We'll be back tomorrow with a regular episode of Three Things. Till then, Merry Christmas.
Hello and welcome to the Sandeep Roy Show on Express Audio.
The Sandeep Roy Show.
Only 2% of the population of India is Christian. But Christmas, as a festival, punches well above its weight when you think of all the lights, parties, mall decorations, and cakes. Christmas in India means cotton wool snow, carols in shopping malls, and men in Santa suits going ho, ho, ho. We don't miss out on anything. Christmas trees, Christmas lights, rich plum cake, all of which seems to come out of some winter wonderland Christmas card fantasy rooted neither in India nor in Bethlehem for that matter. I mean, in Bethlehem, in the birthplace of Jesus, there was no snow, no Christmas trees, and no reindeer. So what is actually Indian about an Indian Christmas? In the new anthology, Indian Christmas, writers Jerry Pinto and Madhulika Liddle bring together essays that capture the many unique flavors of an Indian Christmas, from a village in Nagaland to Bow Barracks in Kolkata, from the churches of Goa to rural Jharkhand, where the Christmas cake itself is replaced by a deep-fried rice flour sweet called ersa. Jerry Pinto and Madhulika Liddle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you for having us. And season's greetings.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Thank you for having us here, and a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to come.
Thank you. We all need some of that. So when did each of you realize there was no Santa Claus?
I don't think there is no Santa Claus. I think Santa Claus is an accretion of a set of beliefs that starts, I think, with gold, frankincense and myrrh being brought to the Christ child's manger. That began the tradition of gift giving, I think, in Christianity. And then, of course, there is that Bishop of Smyrna, Nicholas, who heard about the young women who needed dowries, I believe, and sold his property and helped them get dowries and get them married. And then that started off another tradition, Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, and then Santa Claus eventually, dressed in the robes that are given to him by Coca-Cola in an inspired moment of advertising. At the center of every myth and every legend is a core human truth. And the core human truth, I think, is there is nothing so wonderful as a gift, right? It just makes everybody happy to receive a gift. So, hey, you can be Santa Claus tomorrow. Just, wrap up something and hand it over to somebody.
What about you, Madhulika? Did you have a moment when you crushingly realized there was no Santa Claus?
I think I was probably about 8 or 9 when it suddenly dawned on me that it was my parents who were putting the gifts under the tree. But you know what? It didn't really make a difference. Because the whole point, as Jerry said, is in the gift giving, it makes me so happy to receive a gift. And the fact that my parents, whom I loved so much and who I knew loved me so much, were giving me a gift and had been giving me gifts all these years, even if they were disguised as Santa Claus, that was enough. So it wasn't as if it was some sort of crushing blow to realize that there is actually no Santa.
Actually, I think even though, we are not a Christian family, we used to also get gifts at Christmas. And I think the year I realized there was no Santa Claus was when my aunt visited from London. And suddenly the quality of the gifts changed dramatically in 1 year. But all this to the anthology that you guys have edited, what were some of the Christmas traditions each of you grew up with? Because I was curious how much overlap was there and how much difference was there.
See, my family is from Uttar Pradesh. My father's family is from Uttar Pradesh. My mother is part Bengali, part UP. So she grew up in Calcutta. So Calcutta is this, it has a somewhat Anglo-Indian influenced Christmas. So it's more westernized. Whereas in UP, especially in the time my father was growing up, it was, the sort of like all our carols were Hindi carols and things like that. We used to sing a lot of Christmas carols, Hindi, Urdu, lots of English ones. And the English ones, my mother would invariably sort of twist them around a little bit. So instead of singing While Shepherds Watched Their Flocks by Night, we used to sing While Shepherds Washed Their Socks by Night. The food is something which I think anybody who reads the book will realize that the food is a major part of Christmas celebrations. And our food was, again, it was like fairly eclectic, but a lot of North Indian influences. So, for instance, besides the Christmas cake, there would always be gujiyas, and there would be namak paras, shakkar paras. And then for the Christmas lunch, there would be chicken curry and matar pulao and shami kebabs and stuff like that. So that was there. And of course, for me, one real problem was that because my father was in the IPS, he got transferred around a lot. And I grew up mostly in places like Madhya Pradesh or Srinagar, or later in Delhi for a while, where there was never a very large Christian community. There would be a parish and there would be some amount of interaction between parishioners, but there was none of that vibrant, large community, which is perhaps a way of actually keeping Christmas, sort of in a big way, celebrating Christmas in a big way, like you'd perhaps have even in Calcutta to some extent. So we missed out on that. A lot of our Christmases were, sort of very small affairs at home. And of course, the fact was that because my father was posted in some really tiny places, we ended up having to do what is called jugaad. As in you never found the right type of Christmas decorations. There was nothing fancy, so you improvised with paper streamers and cotton wool. And my mother had to, at times she made candied peel herself to be able to bake the Christmas cake. So that was what our Christmases were like.
I think, resonating a lot with what Madhulika is saying, I think in general we are a 2% minority everywhere in the country. So it's not like there's lots of us anywhere at any given time. Perhaps Nagaland has a wonderful Christmas. And people tell me a lot about Goa, but it's 26% in Goa. And there's also been a demographic shift, right? So I grew up in a parish where there were 11,000 souls. And Christmas, midnight mass was, you had to, go pretty early. You had to get there by about 10:30 at least to make sure that you got place inside the church. By about 11, the church would be completely filled. And then, the old ladies would start trickling in and claiming their seats because they'd always come to church every single day. And they had their seats and now you were sitting on their seats. And of course, you had to be terribly civilized and go sit outside. You went and sat outside. It was, then there were those jokes about outstanding Catholics. You ended up sitting under a mango tree and listening to the story of the nativity and of this child who doesn't have a place to live. And outside, just outside the periphery, would be the poor. Literally, the beggars, the balloon sellers, the candy floss man, all of them waiting for you to come out and spend some money or give them something. So it kind of like, there was never a time when Christmas was a postcard or, that lovely greeting card image. It was always a sense of this being how things are. But what I really love and what I say in the introduction also is that I think the Christ child himself is a child in distress. He is under threat of his life. His parents are refugees and they are homeless. The capitalist institutions of the inn and the hotel will not give them refuge. So they take refuge in nature, literally go back to animals and the warm breath of cows and goats and donkeys are warming the child. And I think there's something there as a little reminder to all of us, that this isn't really the classic celebration of a birth. Though it is, centrally, that's the myth, right? That's always the myth, the birth. And, Madhulika was talking about what was cooked. And I think what was cooked is always, the question in the cook's head is, what will make everyone happy? So if gujiyas make you happy, that's what will happen on Christmas Day. Like, I mean, a Christmas cake is not really an Israeli thing or a Middle Eastern thing in the first place, So the whole of the Christmas mythology is accretion. It grows from each community. And I think one day, the way things are going, Britain will be eating sorpatel and sandas at Christmas, and enjoying it pretty much like the way they enjoy other Indian food.
So let's take something as basic as a Christmas cake, and many of the pieces in this anthology, not surprisingly, deal with the memories of making Christmas cakes at home. So how does a Christmas cake in India vary or change as you travel across India?
Well, some Christmas cakes I knew were circular because there were no ovens, but there was a kind of ring that you could fill with your cake dough and put on the gas. And then you turned it, you turned it over and baked it on the other side as well. You put his candied peel and stuff in the center, and then you covered it with a little marzipan, and then it began to look like a cake. But we all knew that it was a jugaad cake. And then there was the cake, the Irani bakeries of Bombay were at their best during this time because you would go with, many people could not bake at home. And this was also the time in my childhood of limited cooking gas. So very often by the 25th or so, like the gas cylinder was shaky and empty. And so you had to take out the ghaslate ka stove, the gasoline stove, which you had to pump, and then you had to pump it exactly right to get the gasoline into the wicks, but not too much, otherwise it could blow up in your face. And that wasn't what you were going to cook your Christmas cake on, because the faintest trace of gasoline would mean the ruination of cake and therefore the ruination of Christmas. So you would take your cake to the Irani bakery around the corner, who in the middle of the baking of bread would put in one batch of cakes, and then, everybody's cake would be kept out and labeled and, and sent back. And sometimes there were complaints that this can't be my cake. It must be the Castellino cake because she uses this much peel, whereas my raisins have been soaked since October in fine, brandy, etc., etc., etc. And of course, like the plate that you got, right? Like when the serving dish came around, you knew what the make-weights were, and you knew what the really special stuff was. So the really special stuff was the slices of cake and the milk creams and the marzipan, the walnut fudge, because these are like intense labor. And a lot of milk goes into one milk cream, right? Whereas, say, gujia or nyoris or kalkals, which is shankarpali basically, but sweet, those you can make in large quantities. So there would be a genteel scramble to get at the good stuff as the tray went round.
Madhulika, what about ingredients on the cake? Do they change as you go to different communities?
I think they do to some extent. For instance, a Marathi friend of mine was telling me that in their Christmas cake, they always put chironji. Now, chironji is not something we would consider putting. Whereas here in North India, in at least our family recipe, petha is always put. In judicious amounts. I mean, I find it very syrupy.
So sweet!
It's very sweet. But this is like a tiny amount. It's really tiny. And, a lot of people do skip that as well. And I believe the commercial cake known as the Allahabadi cake, they put ghee instead of butter and they put orange marmalade, which actually makes sense. It's like peel, but you put less, a slightly different version of candied orange peel. I think in South India, a lot of cashew nuts appear in cake. For instance, up north, I see very few people using cashew nuts, more people using things like walnuts or almonds.
No coconut? Coconut doesn't appear in cake anywhere?
No.
How interesting.
No, I've never seen coconut appear. Also, our family has an interesting Christmas cake in that we never soak the fruit. We never macerate the fruit. So it's a very good cake for anybody who is like too busy in the weeks leading up to Christmas, because you don't have to worry about sort of feeding your fruit with booze or anything. So all of it happens at the end. When you're actually making the cake, then you put in whatever brandy or whiskey or whatever you need to do. And that is it.
Oh, it's like flash soaking.
Yes. It doesn't be that. Not even soaking. It's just like bung it in at the end and mix it all up.
Oh, it's like a baptism.
So, well, there are different versions of cake. And of course, there are plenty of people who don't just macerate the fruit in booze, but they feed the cake also over the weeks with more booze.
Absolutely love it. I think the reason why this Christmas cake as a gag gift happens is because of the American addiction to sugar. There's always sugar throughout the year. Whereas for us, when I was growing up, for instance, cake happened very, very infrequently. Cake happened on birthday, cake happened on Christmas Day, and not even, I think, at Easter. At Easter, we had Easter eggs, which were largely sugar most of the time, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, then you got chocolate or marzipan. So I think it was the rarity of the cake that made it so special. This idea that there was dessert was not something we grew up with.
Do you know anyone who used jaggery in Christmas cake?
I think lots of people now do, especially those health freaks, blast them. I can't imagine why you would do like a cake and health conscious doesn't fit in the same sentence. I mean, you're happy conscious when you're eating cake. You're not health conscious.
For both of you, was Jim Reeves and his songs an integral must-have in Christmas, no matter which part of India you are in?
100%. Jim Reeves, Frank Sinatra, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. The idea of snow, the idea of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, all of that was certainly part of Christmas, so much so that, the children in the street knew, the urchins knew, and if anybody was dressed up as Santa Claus, they would shout jingle bells at him. They knew that this was like something to do with you guys and your celebration. And this is so the music was definitely part of it, and you always went back to the 1950s. And of course, the family soprano had to give her rendition of Silent Night at some particular point in the evening.
After a glass of wine, maybe. That always helps. But no, my throat is terrible right now. Okay, some warm honey and brandy, etc. But Madhulika, is something like Jim Reeves still part of your Christmas?
Yes. In fact, the other day we were sort of curating a Christmas playlist, and I had Jim Reeves there, and there was Burl Ives and who else? Bing Crosby. These were the people who were like, you have to have them on your Christmas playlist. You can't sort of miss them out. In fact, my daughter said, look, I found a very nice version of What Child Is This? And I had to listen, and I said, this is something newfangled. I don't want it.
So in that sense, is Christmas really about holding on to traditions, or do you think Christmas is changing and reinventing itself?
I believe, all festivals have to be kind of like a continuum between the distant past, the imagined past even, and the present, and the hope for the future. So with Christmas, the Christ child, the birth of the child, Carl Sandburg said it beautifully, every baby born is God's opinion that the world should continue. So in that sense, that the idea of birth, whether it's Janmashtami or it's Christmas, is the future.
In Christianity, there is actually no injunction to celebrate the birth of Jesus, because the one you're actually commemorate is actually the death and resurrection. That is the one that's sort of religiously mandated, if you will.
I remember a priest saying once in a homily at Easter time, anyone can be born, but only one man was reborn. Okay? And that's why Easter is the central thing. And everyone in the congregation nodded their heads and went back to treating Easter as like the second round celebration, and Christmas as the central celebration. Look at the timing of Christmas, it's perfect. Just when the year is dying, you need that last boost to get you through to the next year. And Christmas comes along on December 25. And then there is that that little wave that takes you to the first. And then, you're in the quotidian reality of making resolutions and breaking them and all, which is the New Year's. So I think the timing of Christmas is really also really significant to its mythologies.
I think what I would also add here is that there's a sort of joyousness to Christmas, which is a sort of infectious, fun thing, which is not quite Easter, Easter is not fun. It's happy and joyous in a restrained and a solemn sort of way. It's not joy. I don't know if I'm being very clear or not, but
I think you're being very careful, which is okay.
I think the happiness, for me at least, the happiness between the happiness of Christmas and the happiness of Easter are two completely different forms of happiness. And there's something about Christmas which is very appealing in perhaps a non-religious sort of way. It's more secular, it's more fun, it's more, okay, let's have a blast sort of thing, which you wouldn't do at Easter.
Exactly.
The one exception I can think of, though, is Amar Akbar Anthony's Easter Ball. My name is Anthony Gonsalves, where he jumps out of an Easter egg. Really fun and really odd that, it is not a Christmas dance, it's an Easter ball. And if you think about it, Madhulika, Sandeep, maybe instead of going for midnight mass, go for Easter Vigil. It's a really beautiful ceremony. The entire church in darkness, then the doors open, the officiating priest comes in with a single candle, and he says, I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. And he lights the first candle to his left, and slowly candles light up all over the church. And that feeling of rebirth. But the central thing there is that you've got to accept the rebirth as a myth. Yes. Right? It's not an easy ask. Whereas on the other hand, hey, there's a kid being born. Yay! Let's all have a blast. This everybody can get.
And in the process of, collecting the pieces for this book, did you find out much about what were pre-British or pre-colonial Christmas traditions in India?
Well, I suppose, you have Bishop Heber and you have all those ladies who came and I mean, the real narratives are really narratives of loss. They are thinking about the fact that, it's really stewing hot in the afternoon. And, they still have to get dressed in 3 layers of wool and get themselves to church. So mainly the traditions, the narrative traditions, are traditions of nostalgia for an imagined past. We don't have those many Indian Christian writings about Christmas especially, or about celebrations at all. And that's, I think, also the great, horrible sorrow that I feel, our refusal to keep records. We throw out old letters, we throw out old diaries, someone dies and, all their stuff is just junked. And today, if you had, say, an 1890 accounts book maintained by some diligent wife in Meerut, how much you would learn, right, from that one accounts diary. And instead, at the end of the year, practically, we are already saying, Raddi wale ko bulao, ye sab nikal do. Some of it is having very small homes. Some of it is just a complete contempt for what was yesterday. There is a lovely Goa Familia project that is happening in Goa about families, about Goan families. I hope this is replicated across the world, because then slowly some elements of this will start coming back, like what people did on Christmas Day, where they went, what they sang.
Yeah, I don't think it's, this contempt for maintaining documents is something which I view as well, because there's so much which is completely missing and completely gone. For instance, talking about Christmas traditions, there is Mani Mugdha Sharma's essay in the book where he talks about how the Portuguese, when they were here, they used to set up these cribs and there were thousands of people coming. It would have been so lovely to have known what was going through the minds of those thousands of people. But that's the problem. We feel that only what is the lives of the politically and the wealthy, the politically powerful, those should be documented and, in glowing terms. But nobody else counts.
Yeah, we have this joke here in Bengal that the only things people will save here are houses where Rabindranath Tagore slept for one night. Then it's worth saving. Otherwise, it's not. But having the thing of Tagore, I was interested to read in the book that every year at Christmas, he would actually give a talk on the significance of Christmas and the birth of Christ.
I think, it's a fairly common thing with Indian mystics and Indian spiritual figures. I've heard of many others who also deal with the figure of Christ. I think also because, in your ashrams of today, there are many white people. And many white people who are just thinking, I could be home for Christmas, but I'm not. So I think, and also, of course, there is a beautiful message of love and of hope and of service. All those things which are really, really important as well. For Tagore and for Gandhi, the other was a Christian thought, not a Christian person, but a Christian thought. And the work that they did with Tagore, with Gandhi, and even perhaps Nehru, was to try and find a way in which to bring the best of that Christian thought into the realm of Indic thought. Not only Hindu thought, but Indic thought. How do we get this sense of the open economy of the evangelist into our feeling of how we disseminate ideas and opinions? You can see I'm tiptoeing very carefully here. I'm saying, I think, because a lot of Gandhi reading Ruskin and Tolstoy, Nehru growing up in Harrow, all these are traces and elements of these things that the founding fathers, especially, I think, needed to deal with in a concrete way.
In fact, in one of the essays in the book, there is this discussion, or maybe I read it somewhere else, about Christianism as the influence of Hinduism. What are your thoughts in this collecting the works of people from different parts of India on the ways Indians have made Christmas their own, rather than it being about replicating snow with cotton wool?
I think, even the snow as cotton wool has a place to play somewhere in the larger scheme of things. I think it's an important aspect of saying to yourself that there is a way in which we can integrate who we are with what this is. The fact of the matter is that Indian Christianity is underexplored. I have the feeling that I remember once I was at the St. Michael's Church where there is a novena, and the novena is to the Mother of Perpetual Succor, and the Mother of Perpetual Succor carries the Christ child in her arms. And the woman looking at the pictures turned to me and she said, it's so lovely to see a Devi with a baby. And I looked at the Devi and the baby and I thought, oh yeah, there is a Devi and a baby. You look at it even more carefully and it prefigures, because the angels who are presenting in the icon are presenting the cross, and the Christ child's slipper falls off his foot in fear. So there is kind of like that whole, that rolling up of an entire life in this thing, and that entire life told in a stereophonic sound in a way, like, 4 different versions. How postmodern is that? That, you don't have a single version, you have 4 versions. And this idea of versions is something that appeals deeply to India, because, see, when people ask me about, translation and loss in translation, I say, if the person is a Christian, I say, do you speak Aramaic? Because that's what Jesus probably spoke. Do you speak Hebrew? Because that's what the Old Testament was written in. Do you speak Demotic Greek? Because that's what the Gospels were written in. And if you don't, then you got most of your religion in translation. And this is true for most of us, because Hindus don't speak Sanskrit largely. So I think, the fact that we're translating, even when we were working on the tappe and looking at how it felt like, what are we bringing across this river? And I had to remind myself that English is not the other bank. The other bank is another language, completely alien to me. And just because I see my Christ as an English-speaking Christ, or I think of my Bible as an English Bible, that's not the reality. You remember Tyndale was burned for translating the Bible the first time.
One of the things which really I loved about this collection was that there are so many varied voices and it's very different. So for instance, like I said earlier, that I was never lucky enough to be in a place which had a Christian community, which had a large Christian community. But you look at some of the essays, like for instance, the one by Veo Puo, which is about Naga village in the Manipur Highlands, and the way the community feeling, the community celebration of Christmas comes about is beautiful. It is so heartwarming, and it is so, for me, it's a slightly alien concept, but it's a concept I would love to aspire to, and I would love to be part of something like that. There are lots of other superficial things, like the foods we eat, the music we play, the language in which we conduct our worship, all of that differs. I think also what it shows is the regional diversity of India, because it's not as if the religion sets people apart. It's not, like for instance, if the people of Chota Nagpur are celebrating with, say, Irisa, which is what they often have instead of Christmas cake, or they are going out to a riverbank to sort of the entire community, the village goes out and has a dance or something. What they're doing is they're mirroring what their non-Christian friends have been doing also for maybe many centuries. I also realized when I was thinking of how our gujiyas are a part of our Christmas celebrations. Because when I look at my Hindu friends here in North India, gujiyas are holy celebration. Similarly, my feeling was that it's probably happened that my ancestors, when they converted, they were associating gujiyas with a major festival. And when they switched religions and their major festival became something else, they decided, why should we change? Why not still commemorate it with what we like? So my take is that perhaps Christians, when we've converted, when Indians, whenever they've converted, wherever they've converted, have retained a huge corpus of what we regard as things which make our life happy. So things which are languages, or how we dress, or what we eat, or how we celebrate. All of that stays the same. The tone of it may change slightly, but a lot of it remains the same. And the diversity of Christmas comes through in that. It's basically a reflection of India's diversity.
I guess it leads to the question, would someone used to a Bandra Christmas recognize it if it went to an Adivasi Christmas somewhere near Ranchi?
I should not talk about Christmas here, but about Easter. I have actually had an experience like this. My father was many years ago posted in Manipur, and I visited him. I'd spent most of the past 15 years living in Delhi. So I was used to going to the cathedral and all that for church, for service. And that year, for Easter, I went to visit my father, and he took me up into the highlands of Manipur. And I remember going for a sort of a morning, the dawn service on Easter. My father took me, he said, come, I'll show you, let's go and attend a service. And it was amazing because the service happened at a cemetery, which is how a lot of Easter dawn services happen. And there was a cemetery spread out all across and a hill, and we were all sitting on it, on the grass and all that. And the whole service was conducted in the local language. I didn't understand a word of it. But yet, the impression it made on me was profound. So I think somehow the ethos and the emotion, it seeps through.
I think the Roman Catholic Church also has a very standardized service. So I remember once my uncle priest was in the backwaters of Karnataka and conducting Christmas Mass in Kannada. But my sister and I, we didn't know a thing that he was saying, but because we knew what prayer was going to be said, we said the prayer. We said it, and we found that the rhythms were matching completely. The songs, sometimes a couple of them, I think I remember What a Friend We Have in Jesus, because I immediately recognized the tune. And I thought, okay, well, we can sing this in English. And we did. And there was another one, I think at the end, the recessional was Make Me a Channel of Your Peace, which again, was like no-brainer to sing with everybody. And I think in that sense, we missed the sermon, of course, but it was fine. It was absolutely fine.
Speaking of the songs, though, I know there are several translations in your book as well, but are most of these sort of Punjabi, Hindi, are they just translations of existing carols, or does Indian Christmas have sort of its own songbook of indigenous carols in Punjabi or whatever language?
There are a couple of translations. Hark the Herald Angels Sing is Suno Asmani Fauj Sharif or something. And O Kamoli Faithful is Aisa Bimandaro. So there are some, but they are far outnumbered by the songs which have been composed and written in, at least as far as Hindi and Urdu are concerned, there are definitely lots and lots of songs. So that's there.
You mentioned some Punjabi song you used to sing?
Yes.
You're going to have to sing it, it's
I know very little of it. Aj apna roop vata ke aaya Isa yaar sade paas. Aj apna roop vata ke aaya Isa yaar sade paas. Hun kamjor hoyo iblisa, hun kamjor hoyo iblisa. भेजा तेरा भजिया सप्पा, भेजा तेरा भजिया सप्पा. So it goes on like that. It's quite a rollicking song, actually.
Well, that's wonderful. That as it should be, keeping in the spirit of it. And what about the food, which is such a huge part of the book? Was turkey common at all when you were growing up? Because now you go to Calcutta and at this time of the year, they're selling them on the street in Newmarket.
No, never turkey.
Never.
Never turkey. Turkey wasn't, it was
Never
nothing, it's a very annoying sort of meat I found. So anyone who's grown up on Goan, Christmas was pork. There's someone had to be really ill in the family or, and then maybe you'd do a chicken. Because chicken was Easter, chicken was your birthday party, but pork was really important for at least. And there was pork for breakfast, there was pork for lunch, there was pork for dinner, there was sausages in the morning and bacon and eggs, and then there was sorpatel and vindaloo and sannas, and then the repeat for dinner. Yeah.
But no suckling pig?
Suckling pig was very, 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 how should I put it, elite. Okay, I remember actually going to a wedding around Christmas time and being told that the suckling pig is not to be touched. It's presented on the buffet, but it's not to be touched. And I thought, why did you present it on the buffet then?
Maybe it was plastic.
No, of course it was touched then. 2 or 3 uncles who had gone, it used to be prohibition. So the bottles were in the bar, ambassador, very nice boot at the back. So they came back and they hadn't heard the indictment, the forbidding.
Injunction.
So the injunction. So they went and attacked. And once it was attacked, then it was finished. But see, a suckling pig is really expensive. It means that you're taking out a pig that could grow to about 300 kilos. You're taking it out when it's 2.5 kilos, 2 kilos max. Even the piggery doesn't like doing it.
Well, I would feel a little squeamish at the idea of eating a suckling pig at an event celebrating the birth of the Savior. It's a little conflict of interest, I have to admit. What about Madhulika in terms of, I assume you said you had chicken curry, so you all would. So was it a special chicken curry for Christmas or was it, no, so it wasn't a Christmas curry?
No. Somehow throughout the year, we rarely had chicken curry as such. Most of the times at home, we used to have mutton. And because the problem was that we lived in Madhya Pradesh and Srinagar and all places where we never got pork. I would love to have had lots of pork, but we never got pork. We got very, very limited pork, no beef at all. So it had to be chicken or it had to be mutton. And frankly, when it comes to choosing between chicken and mutton, almost everybody in my family chooses mutton. So for some reason, we didn't have that much chicken curry during the year. It emerged only at Christmas. It was nothing very fancy, but it was a very nice curry. There would always be shami kebabs. In the heyday when nobody was too health conscious and it was fine to have lots of meat. So my mother would also make a mutton pulao. So it would not be like plain rice and all that. Later she said, no, this is too much. You should not be eating so much red meat. She started doing butter pulao.
What about duck? Is duck common or has it always been common across India in terms of Christmas?
I think in Kerala there's a duck moli, no?
And they do also, a lot of Malayali friends told me that their traditional Christmas lunch is appams with duck roast. And see, also the thing is, duck is not very easily available in, say, North India. So, whereas in, say, in Assam or something, you would be able to get duck. My mother remembers that when they lived in Assam, which was like ages ago, which is more than 50 years ago, at one time, she said that they were really hard up and they were living in this tiny little place called Devendra Nagar, where they didn't even have a house. They didn't have a proper house. They had to live in a tent. And she said the only thing she could afford to buy was a duck. So she bought a duck for Christmas for 8 rupees and she made duck roast with that.
Well, your mother will be happy to know that her 8 rupee duck now sells for 795 rupees a plate, and that's for one person at a restaurant in Calcutta right now, with your little orange glaze or whatever.
It's odd, like a lot of the things that you think, like say for instance, a roast chicken, and as opposed to a chicken curry. Now, if you do a roast chicken, it's dry. And your stuffing includes things like cocktail sausages and gibbets and other things. So immediately the cost of that chicken goes up tremendously. Whereas with the chicken curry, what is inevitable is a huge amount of rice. So now you're actually carb loading. You're filling up on carbs and you have like chicken curry on the top and maybe 2 or 3 pieces of chicken. You also have potatoes. Some very pushy people actually put kaddu and stuff into there. Yeah, it's a thickener. I don't know if you've read Christmas with the Cratchits in Christmas Carol. where
Yes.
it's a huge description of how the goose came out and how everybody ate and enjoyed themselves. And at the end, Mrs. Cratchit, seeing one small piece of bone on the platter, says they hadn't eaten it all. It was so big they hadn't eaten it all. So you're also like in that time, Madhulika's account of this tent living duck Christmas, brings back the economy of Christmas also. No? It is an expensive festival, and everybody's got to have new clothes and go to church in their best, and very often there's a lot of interchanging, and old things are being cut up, saris are being made into other things, so it takes a little jugaad there also.
Do you all find Christmas now becoming more sort of boilerplate and internationalized in a way? I just saw this ad on Instagram where the local cafe is suddenly offering stollen for Christmas, which we didn't really have much of. But so I was wondering if there's now a sort of, because of social media and all of that, a kind of international template for Christmas, as it were.
Yes, I think social media and a general sort of globalization is what is there. But I'm not sure that actually translates into how Christians themselves are celebrating the festival. Because say, for instance, what happened was that when I was doing the introduction to the book, I was given just a week to write the introduction, and that involved quite a bit of research. So just to sort of get the research going, I posted a question on my Facebook page, asking my friends to sort of weigh in with how they celebrate Christmas traditionally. And all the Christians spoke of how they celebrated their own regional takes on Christmas. And there were a couple of non-Christians who said, we do roast turkey and we do stuffing and we do Christmas pudding and all this sort of stuff. So I think that a lot of it is what is expected. Because the thing is, a lot of Indian Christians don't talk about what we do on Christmas, right? You see outside, you see in the churches that, this is how a church is lit up or whatever. You go for the service and you know what the service is going to be like. You know what carols are sung. But unless you happen to be sort of, say, very good friends with a Christian, you're unlikely to be going into a home to see what they cook, right, on Christmas Day. We don't sort of make a big commercially visible thing about it. Whereas things like stollen and your cranberry sauce and turkey and sage stuffing and whatever is so hugely visible. So which is why even if you are Indian and that is not obviously an Indian thing, it feels attractive and it feels the way Christmas should be celebrated.
The boilerplate is out there, Sandeep. Your heart doesn't have to respond to the boilerplate. You can see that even Diwali, say for instance, or the creation of new things. I don't remember ever hearing of an Akshay Tritiya when I was growing up. And now Akshay Tritiya is the great time to buy gold, we are told. So you can see that marketing men will do what they do. But they don't have to be part of you. They don't have to be part of how you celebrate your Christmas. And eventually it's a drawing in, no? At that moment when it's family, it's community, it's quiet, and it's significant. So outside there may be, raucous decorations and encouragements to a capitalist Christmas, but it doesn't have to be that way in your heart or your home.
So you won't worry, Jerry, in terms of, I speak about Calcutta, is that, see, when I was growing up, I knew there was an Anglo-Indian area called Bow Barrack, right, where people would celebrate. But in the last maybe 10 years, that has become an enormous tourist attraction. And the last time when I went there were obviously way more non-Anglo-Indian, non-Christian people partying in Bow Barracks before Christmas than the people from the area itself. It's sort of a double-edged sword. And one way you can say this is the wonderful thing about secular cultural tradition. And yet there's also the danger that in the secular cultural tradition, what you were talking about, the quieter tradition for the people it really belongs to, get left out of the picture.
I don't know about left out of the picture, and I don't know. I think the marketing man we have always had with us. Okay, it is not like he's a new phenomenon. And his desire to turn everything into a buying opportunity is really what every priest thunders from his pulpit about, that this is not about buying, but it's about giving, and etc., etc., etc. I get that. So I think when a community celebration is kind of hijacked, you just look at how it has been hijacked and to what end it has been hijacked. Do the people of Bow Barrack stand to gain from it? Do they feel invaded? Do they feel hostile? Or do they feel, hey, it's a party, everyone's welcome to the party? And in general, I think the spirit of Christmas is come in and have a blast.
No, there was an auntie from Bow Barracks, I think, who had it with reporters who come around at this time of the year. And I remember she was at this cake baking thing and she was like, no, I'm just here to get my cake baked. I don't want to give you the cake recipe. And I don't want to, I just need to know if this Montu is over baking the cake or not.
I completely sympathize with her. There are times when I have been treated as the nominal Christian as well. And, like the television cameras want you to come and say what you think. So I understand where she's coming from. But, for most of us, it is like an open house, open heart event.
And in that sense, Madhulika, is your relationship with Christmas different than your relationship with the church itself? Because many of us have many issues in so many ways about positions church takes on different things.
I think for me, Christmas is actually more a very personal thing. Over the years, I've sort of drifted away from organized religion, really. So for me, it's a question of faith and the sort of support and the dependence, the comfort which faith provides to me. So for instance, the past 2 years, I wasn't able to go to church, not even at Christmas. So we found a place which was streaming the service and we watched. But it wasn't as if I missed going to church, really. And I've realized that now the whole significance of the festival, the reason for the festival is enough for me. And to sort of rejoice within my home, with my family is enough. When Jerry was talking just now about how, the bringing the correct frame of mind. And I was also thinking that in a place like Bow Barracks, even while there's all the partying going on, a lot of the residents are probably also finding their peace and the true meaning of Christmas, the sort of the more spiritual part of it in other ways. So while the party is happening, there might be other places within their own homes or within a church or whatever, where they are finding that. So, it sort of evens out. And I think Christmas is inclusive enough and vast enough for everybody to find their own interpretation of it and to be able to rejoice in their own way. So I think it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And as long as all of us find some happiness in the festival and are able to sort of inculcate the feeling of peace and goodwill, perhaps that is what we really all just need.
And Jerry, at a time when we now have Good Governance Day on December 25th, do you feel Christmas needs to be protected or is under attack?
I think, in some senses, if you look around you, Sandeep, right now, I don't know if there is a community that does not feel under attack. So the Hindu right wing tells us, for instance, that Hinduism is under attack. They say it all the time. We know that there is almost institutionalized Islamophobia across the world, not just in India. And then there is the fact that we are a minority and we are a minority whose numbers seem to be decreasing all the time, and yet there is this fear of conversion. So it seems that in some ways, fear is the dominant motif right now in all communities. And I think it is up to all of us to work in some ways to pull the plug on that fear, to refuse to be afraid of the other and to look at the other and say, yeah, there is room at the inn. We are opening our doors.
Jerry Pinto, Madhulika Liddle, thank you so much and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Sandeep, and to everyone at the Indian Express. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Merry Christmas to you and to everybody who's listening in. Thank you.
Writers Jerry Pinto and Madhulika Liddle are the editors of the new anthology Indian Christmas. While the famous bakeries like Flurys and Nahum's in Kolkata see the big Christmas cake lines at this time of the year, The real Santa Land is in dingy lanes in central Kolkata. That's where you smell Christmas because of bakeries like Montu's. I went there a couple of years ago, and the man I asked for directions said, "There's no sign outside, but you'll know it from the smell of cakes baking." But when I finally got there, it was more Dickensian than Willy Wonka, a sweatshop for cakes. The rooms were cramped and dingy, the paint peeling, the passageways narrow. Shirts and old bags hung from hooks on the wall. Workers squatted on the floor, briskly stirring mounds of flour with slabs of amul butter and sugar, cracked eggshells littered around them. Their hands moved in a whir as they beat bowls of sunny yellow batter. Montu's own cakes are legendary. Fruit cakes, plain cakes, box cakes, cheap cakes sold in tea shops, and the white chana cake made with curdled milk. But come Christmas, Montu did something the big fancy patisseries did not. He rented out his oven and his bakers for anyone who wanted their own home-baked Christmas, like Shirin Poddar. She brought her flour, sugar, eggs, chopped fruits, old monk rum, and a little brandy in her red coat shopping bag. "I'm not Christian, but I love fruitcake," she said as she presided over her cake mixing. "Have you washed your hands properly?" she scolded as the workers started mixing flour and sugar. She measured out the rum and the rum-soaked raisin. Right before Christmas, this becomes practically a 24-hour operation. Above the heads of workers beating the batter, other workers slept on bunk beds, oblivious to the racket. The oven is rented not by the hour, but by the kilo of sugar. At about rupees 250 per kilo of sugar at that time, Montu's cakes were still a deal. Rocky Michael D'Abrio had been coming to Montu's for 2 generations. "Wherever his bakery has moved, we've followed," he said. And Montu accommodated everybody, even if it meant he barely had time to sleep. But I'm sure these last few days before Christmas, it must get crazy. It must be difficult to accommodate everybody. No, at this time, just the last 2 or 3 days before.
Awake the whole night.
He told me.
They don't go. You see, they are sleeping here, then rotation they are shifting. So next few days, I think nobody goes. Even it's 24 hours. And these are round the clock. He'll get tired and he'll go to sleep for 4 hours, 5 hours, he'll get up, somebody else will come. So that's their process.
But Mrs. Morris, a formidable woman in a flowered dress with a walking stick, was not happy. She'd been waiting around for hours, and she had a lot of stitching and sewing to do at home.
This is just given us correct time. I have so much stitching pending over there. He tells me 11:30 and then now he's then you are just waiting. And so much too many people in the morning.
You've been waiting from 11:30?
Then 11:30. And he tells us then how ho jayega.
But they all waited because Montu was a master baker. Even the neighborhood drunk agreed. The local tough barged in, created a ruckus, cursed and threatened, and then ultimately staggered around demanding free cake. Mrs. Morris was unfazed. She was more perturbed about her cakes than drunks. She was afraid Montu was turning up the heat too high to save time.
अभी तक सादा है ना? हाँ? मोंटू इतना तेज मत दो बाबा. हाँ? कहाँ नहीं निकाल लाल नहीं होता है.
Montu, a grey-haired man in a sleeveless vest, his hands blackened with soot, placated her with tea. He said business is good at this time as he put another batch into the huge wood-fired oven.
এক্সমাসে তো ভিড় মানে বেশি মেন সার্ভিসের ভিড় বেশি হয় এবং আমাদের যে কাস্টমার সব আছে আর আছে কেক সাপ্লাই দিতে হয় মোটামুটি মানে ভালোই মানে কাজটা ভালোই হয়.
His grandfather learned this from the British. He was a cook for them. He is the third generation in the trade, and he might be the last. This is back-breaking work, especially during Christmas. He said he barely slept after the 18th of December. Sheikh Saeed, who has been baking here for 20 years, said, demand is up, but the number of bakers is down. The children are all going away.
না ব্যাকিংয়ের ব্যবসা তো মানে কমই হয়েছে, হ্যাঁ বেশি আর হচ্ছে না, হ্যাঁ কারণ এরা বাইরে টাইরে চলে যাচ্ছে.
He said it's hard to find educated people to go into this kind of old-fashioned baking business anymore. Montu's own son was studying hotel management. Now, Montu himself is gone, but the memory of the cakes remain. Batch after batch of fruit cake coming out of the oven, the butter still bubbling, the sugar caramelized, set out on the floor to cool, each baked with a slip of paper bearing the name of the person they belonged to. Shireen, Lucy, Rocky. Home-baked, wood-fired cake as only Montu could bake it.
But finish, mine is over. That's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10.
That's what Christmas smells like. Merry Christmas. It's Christmas, and like Santa, we want to know if we've been good or bad, naughty or nice. So leave us a review wherever you get your podcast from. Find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Express Podcast. Thanks for listening, and Merry Christmas. This show was produced by Shashank Bhargav and edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. This is Sandeep Roy on Express Audio.